Welcome to European History, AP European History with Dr. Brovkin. Last time we began discussion of Russia under Peter the Great. Today is part two. We're discussing great reforms of a great westernizer and a reformer, Tsar revolutionary Peter the Great. We discussed some of his reforms in the beginning, and now we shall continue. But first, I'd like to read to you what contemporaries thought of him. And here's a letter of Frederick the Great of Prussia to Voltaire. And this is what Frederick the Great wrote. I quote, "He was the only truly educated prince. He was not only the legislator of his country, but he understood perfectly all naval sciences. He was an architect, an anatomist, a surgeon, an expert soldier, a consummate economist. To make him the model of all princes, he only needed an education less barbarous and ferocious." So the main idea is that Frederick the Great valued his Russian counterpart very highly. And that will merit when we examine in detail the reforms that Peter the Great did for Russia. Social order, revolutionary social order. He doesn't kill the boyars. He kind of leaves them alone. And instead, he creates new nobility through a very important document which is called Table of Ranks. Table of Ranks basically says if you serve for such an amount of time, you become personal noble, which means you're free and you're noble and you have a stipend for life, usually in the form of a landed estate with serfs fixed to the land. They would pay taxes to you, so you're set. If you serve higher than that and achieve a certain rank, you become hereditary noble, which means your children will be noble too, and you will have these lands as your private property forever. So that actually, in a matter of one generation, Russia got new nobility. But it was new not only because it was through the service to the Tsar and to the country. It went with a new ethos, with a new idea. A noble is a person who serves Russia and the Tsar, not just who is sitting there in his estates thinking that we're going to scheme and plot against the Tsar if we want to. So that kind of nobility is on the way out. Moreover, the boyars, the most important aristocratic families, they switch. They begin to wear European uniform and they begin to serve the Tsar as ambassadors and state directors and so forth. So the Table of Ranks, the most important revolutionary point about it, it opened up career opportunities to anybody with talent. It's merit-based promotion system, which is more advanced than any other European country on the world. It brought talented people to the fore, and it accounted for extraordinary growth of Russian power in the 18th century, thanks to that new nobility. The new nobility is dressed like Europeans. You would see that they're absolutely indistinguishable from the Germans and the Dutch. And they speak German, and later on in the 18th century, they would switch to French. And by the end of the 18th century, Russian nobility speaks French. And some of them don't even know Russian. So they don't need Russian because the only way to speak Russian is to the serfs. But if you don't speak to the serfs, if you're in a high society, you speak French. Number 4, code of laws. Russia got new code of laws, and the most amazing thing is they didn't have to invent them. He translates them from Swedish. He basically takes Swedish law, says translate it, and without even looking what it says, this is going to be the Russian law. It was absolutely extraordinary. Why invent the wheel? It's there to begin with, so he basically uses Swedish law that becomes the basis of the new law. He also creates new Russian government. New Russian government is like this. It used to be that the Tsar had personal officers, and there were 50 A funny thing is, when I was passing a graduate exam in Russian history at Princeton, this is the question that I got: how many departments had Russian government before Peter? And you know what? I didn't know. And I thought I was going to fail that exam on Russian history, which is my major field. So now I know, and I'm going to tell you. The answer is 55. And he abolished all of those, and instead he created what's called 12 colleges, which is really not colleges. It's said in English college. It's not really. It's collegia, which is probably better translated as a council, or a 12 in American English departments, or 12 ministries. So it would be Ministry of the Army, Ministry of the Fleet, Ministry of Taxes, Ministry of serfs, and so on. And they have beautiful, beautiful buildings that were built in St. Petersburg. These colleges today, they are the main building of the St. Petersburg University, where yours truly went when he was 20. Um, St. Petersburg University. So new government structure, a new government system, new government regulations, everything carbon copy as it is in Netherlands. Number six, education. Peter is the founder of Russian education. There was no education. There were just religious schools, and the only literate people were the priests. Now he creates new schools that will develop into a university. He also creates the first museum, which is called Kunstkamera, which means Kunst is art, art room, that still exists and still is a museum, but it would be Catherine who would proceed along the same journey and create even more. One of the greatest museums in the world, Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, she continued what Peter had begun. So education, training, carpenters, sending young kids to foreign universities and bringing them back establishes a tradition that continues to the present day. Number seven, he changes Russian architecture. St. Petersburg doesn't look Russian. It looks like New Amsterdam, or sometimes called New Venice. It's a beautiful city. Some of you will see it soon. And it's a city of palaces. And all the major palaces are built by Italian architects. Rastrelli is one of the famous ones who comes to St. Petersburg, and he's going to build the Winter Palace, which is later, which is after Peter. But Peter himself, his own palace, which I'll show you pictures of, is called Montplaisir. It's in French, right? Montplaisir. It's Dutch. You walk into this beautiful little palace. It kind of looks like Sanssouci by the palace of Frederick the Great, built 20 years later, but they're very similar. One story in Baroque and Dutch. He has Dutch everything there. You just probably love Netherlands. Dutch stove, Dutch furniture, Dutch tables, Dutch architecture, everything is from Netherlands. So this is continues and changes forever the way Russian cities looked. Pete, as number eight is factories, which I already know. The Tsar says, and they built the factory. The reason it's important, it becomes a model of modernization. The American model, the English model is individual initiative of private entrepreneurs. Russian model, which is still very applicable today, is the Tsar says, we are going to build a factory here, and it's done. Like now, Putin says, we're going to build a new space launching cosmodrome. And they did it because the one that the Soviets had is in Kazakhstan. In other words, when the state says this is a priority, it's done from the order from above. And not because it's commercially feasible, not because you're going to get profit from it, none of that stuff. Putin says we need a bridge to Crimea. Well, they just go and do it, regardless of the cost and regardless of whether it will have commercial value or not. So this is a kind of a Russian modernization approach that Peter the Great established. Number nine, St. Petersburg. This is probably one of his most wonderful creations. This is the city where I grew up and which I love dearly. It is, in my judgment, the most beautiful city in Europe. I've been to just about all of them, or most of them. And it is a city of palaces, it's a city of bridges, it's a city of Nivan, this magnificent river, much more beautiful than Seine or any other river, or Thames. It's broad, it's huge, it has ice that's floating in it in June against the blue skies and these open bridges. It's absolutely magnificent. And Peter built it as a window to the west. It was supposed to be a port. So he does build the port, he does build the navy, and he has this big building of what is called stock exchange, where on top of it it says, all flags of the world will be welcome here, which is his dream that come true. I know it's over time, but I need to finish. There's a couple more items. Religious policy. Religious policy was basically none. He was not interested in religion. He let Russians practice religion the way they want to, but it was not interested in any modernizing it. He just left it as it is. The only thing he was concerned is that the priests are not going to organize a subversion of his reforms. So he didn't trust to have a patriarch. So he abolished the patriarch as an institution. Patriarch is the head of church. Now the Byzantine tradition is the emperor is the head of the church. He didn't want to be. So he was not interested in church. So created a new institution which is called Synod, which is the government office that supervises religious affairs. And that's the way it's going to be until 1917. So the kind of office, bureaucratic, that they can do whatever they want in religious affairs, he doesn't care. The only thing is that the leadership should be under control of the state so that they don't plot anything against the Tsar. So this is the church policy. Finally, the Northern War. There are books written about it. It's a huge war. It lasted over 20 years, from about 1700 to 1724. But it is a war that Russia won. It won in the sense of two major consequences. Number one is St. Petersburg. Russia has a capital facing the Baltic Sea, which is a short ride to Copenhagen and Hamburg and London. Russia becomes a European power because of St. Petersburg, because of the Northern War. Russia joins a European community of nations culturally, politically, economically, militarily. It is there to stay from the times of Peter. And from that point of view, it's a revolution. About Sweden. Sweden never fought a war after this. It had no desire to participate in any wars. So that means that it was so soundly defeated that it basically stayed a neutral country till the present time, including present time. And final words. Peter's rule is absolutely extraordinary, and I don't think it has any parallels in history. Because here you have a person who is supposed to be a guardian of old order, the Tsar, that transforms literally everything. Everything. The laws, institutions, the people, the culture, the identity, the very identity of Russians who begin to feel that they are a superpower and a European power and an Asian power. It also creates a tension in the Russian mind, which is sometimes I compare it to Morocco, is that like here, Russia have a love-hate relationship with the West. On the one sense, they feel we are the West. Russians feel offended when European Union is somehow not Russia. Yeah, Ukraine is, Russia isn't. That's just so absurd to Russians that we're by far more European than many of the so-called European. We were the center of European culture 100 years ago, by far more than Greece or Bulgaria, Romania, or any one of those. Russia is Europe. Russia is the center of European culture, just like, equal to Berlin, Paris, and London, and Vienna. That's the way people like me feel, the educated Russians. At the same time, there is a kind of a tension that we're better than Europeans, that Russians' religion is more profound, that Russian Orthodoxy is more is more religious, is more appealing to God and to the eternal values and virtues, rather than this kind of reading and interpreting religion as the Europeans do. In other words, Peter genuinely created a new nation out of medieval Russia. And for that, I do agree with those who say he's the greatest Russian that ever lived. Thank you.